Right now, a lot of the backlash towards the gaming community is centered around wokeness and just a general decline in quality in games. Right? People are talking about the really bad stuff, the microtransactions, the political pandering, just the general decline in quality. And there's nothing quite necessarily wrong with that, but there have been a lot of examples over the past couple of years where legitimately bad games have been passed over or straight up just praised as legitimately great ones, right? There are a lot of examples I can name. Stuff like Red Dead Redemption 2, Ghost of Tsushima, and I think probably the most blatant example of this in recent years, Baldur's Gate 3, a game that is incredibly woke, and yet a lot of people delusionally try to call this one of the best games ever made, right? A lot of people try and portray Baldur's Gate 3 as the best game of 2023, which is ridiculous. One of the most best-selling games of 2023, despite clearly selling less than Hogwarts Legacy, Call of Duty, The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. I'm not even sure it sold more than like Starfield, right? The narrative towards Baldur's Gate 3 was ridiculous. And although people are slowly starting to notice what happened, are slowly starting to understand what the problem with the game is, slowly starting to understand that it falls off after a certain point, slowly starting to understand that there were dozens of games that came out in 2023 that were better than it. Like, the major thing that I want people to understand going into Gamergate 2 is that because there is a major controversy regarding game journos, their coverage, and the games they praise right now, that completely invalidates every and all Western Game Award show, right? You know, every game that won an award, whether it was like Alan Wake 2 or Baldur's Gate 3 or Spider-Man 2, right? Like when the vast majority of the games you're putting out there and are hyping up are like incredibly woke, right? You know you have a problem, right? These are games that are loaded with problems, right? Spider-Man 2 like botched a lot of its character writing, for example. But like you don't see a lot of casuals bring that up. People like Angry Joe just try and like throw their hands up and try to like write off these things as not being actual problems, but in reality they are issues that ruin the entire experience. If you're buying a Spider-Man game, you don't want to play as Peter's lame sidekick Miles, the arachnid kid. Like, why would I want to play as a sidekick in a Spider-Man game, right? Like that would be like if Arkham made you play as like Robin or like Oracle for like a good portion of the game. Like Spider-Man would make you do it. Like that is time and resources that could be devoted to fleshing out the actual protagonist more, right? Like that is something that takes away from the actual core experience of what the game should be about, right? Being Batman, being Spider-Man. That is a real issue. And yet you didn't see a lot of people tell you that about Spider-Man 2. In fact, like right now the big thing is pretending Spider-Man 2 was successful, right? Like, oh, look at this hyper successful like woke product. But the reality, as we've discussed on this channel, is that Spider-Man 2 was not successful, right? They were giving away those games for like $5 in Japan, trying to get it to sell, trying to get it to move PS5s, trying to get it to be relevant, but people just were not interested, right? Like Spider-Man 2, I think, is going to be like a major turning point in how people view this line of Spider-Man games, right? People didn't like the way MJ was handled. People didn't like the direction the story took. People didn't like the rehashed mechanics and just the failure to kind of progress, right? Like again, the superhero craze isn't necessarily dead yet. We're still in that weird phase where like they're trying to be subversive and stuff like that, but there's no denying that we've seen like a drop off of popularity of like woke superhero products that were like initially very popular. You know, stuff like Invincible, stuff like the Spider-Man games, stuff like the MCU, right? These products were always bad, but nobody wanted to admit it, right? Like, oh, look at how much money they're making. They're good, right? Instead of like actually talking about their merits or like anything like that. It was they were always just hiding behind an alleged success, right? And Game Award shows were a major part of that. Alan Wake 2 was a disaster, right? Even now, it's only sold like a million units on like a $70 million budget. That's insane, right? Like that game bombed. Okay, hardcore. Before Game Award season, nobody even knew that game came out, and yet we're supposed to believe this is some phenomenal, like, epic adventure. Like, this is one of the most unique games from any studio. No, it wasn't true about Control. It wasn't true about the original Alan Wake, and it's not true about the sequel. Like, I am sick of game journals pretending that Remedy is in any way a notable game development studio. I'm sick of them pretending Larian is in any way a good development studio. I'm sick of them pretending Naughty Dog is in any way relevant. I'm sick of them pretending that Insomniac is good, that Sucker Punch is good, that any of these major woke like leftist brands are in any way like a way shape or form worth defending. Supergiant Games, right? Like that's one of the most heavily promoted like hyped western video game companies there is, and they haven't put out anything good ever in their entire history, and yet you're supposed to believe that like in you're supposed to believe that like Hades is one of the best games ever. No, no, none of these games are good. None of them. And the Game Awards exist purely as an attempt at trying to justify these products to the masses. All right, like, oh, look at Baldur's Gate 3. Like, what is the defense for Baldur's Gate 3? Right? Whenever you bring up how like the game gets more and more linear as you go on, when you bring up all the woke stuff, when you bring up all the poor character writing and the decision and stuff like that, when you bring up like all the issues Baldur's Gate 3 has, what happens? Like, oh, but it won a Game of the Year award. It was the best game of 2023. No, it wasn't. Like, we need to stop considering Western game journalists as an authority on video games. They don't have standards, they don't have tastes. You're seeing this right now, right? On a on X, seeing these people like religiously defend their industry, right? You're not seeing any of these people try to say that like, well, maybe there are some game journalists who are bad at their jobs and some of them who don't know what they're talking about. Like, I think in a lot of ways there should be like if it was a real critical industry, there would be a lot more discussion about this stuff. There would be a lot more arguments. There would be a lot more like variety and what people like and what they enjoy. But instead, what you see is like everyone moving in lockstep, trying to push the same ideas, trying to push the same games, trying to push the same developers, right? And the reason for that is because all of them are corrupt, all of them are controlled, and all of them are doing everything they possibly can to push their ideology onto you. Game journalists are not to be trusted, and the Western Video Game Award show needs to be ignored and rejected by the masses.